Russia is desperate, and their vaunted cyber forces are feeling the pressure. In late February, Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. To complement the kinetic offensive, Russia launched a series of cyber attacks designed to disrupt or cripple Ukraine's network infrastructure. And this took place both before the war actually began in late February and in its initial phases through early March. And those attacks included all kinds of different types of wiper malware, including Indestroyer, Indestroyer 2, Caddy Wiper, Hermetic Wiper, and others. And they pointed these attacks at Ukraine initially. However, as the war went on, they began to expand the target list for these attacks. That new targeting list included neighboring Poland. These attacks were designed not just to disrupt Ukraine's ability to respond to the incoming invasion, but also to disrupt its logistics network, particularly with NATO, who's been providing all kinds of assistance to Ukraine, both to the government and to its military throughout this war. The objective of these attacks was clearly in line with the Kremlin's objective of toppling the Ukrainian government as quick as possible. However, that's not what happened. To understand why things have gone the way that they have in cyberspace and kind of get an idea on where we're at currently and where we might be going in the future, it's very important to understand what's going on in the physical space. So here's basically what's been going on in a snapshot. One by one, the different lines of effort by the Russian military have failed and in fact been pushed back to the Russian border. First, it was the Russians' attempt to take the city of Kiev within 14 days, and this included a push south from Belarus and another push through the north of Ukraine from Sumy Oblast. That effort failed to breach Kiev in part due to stiff resistance around the city of Kiev, as well as terrible logistics all the way around. And because of these factors, they were forced to retreat back over the border of Belarus, and then they had to abandon the Sumy Oblast axis of advance. Next, after months of protracted fighting, Ukraine launched a series of counteroffensives across different parts of the front line. They broadcast their desire to attack Russian positions around Kherson, and that forced the Russian military to reposition some of its best troops down in that pocket. However, that left its positions around Kharkiv in the north very lightly defended, and Ukraine was able to take advantage. In a series of swift pushes, Ukraine was able to push the Russians to the east. They abandoned their attempts on Kharkiv, and they have now basically pushed the Russians to the borders of Donbass and Luhansk. And then over time, they were also able to put a lot of pressure on the Russian positions in Kherson to the point where they were no longer tenable, and now, of course, the Russians have retreated from Kherson. Now, this is really what's been going on in the physical world, but what has been going on in cyberspace in this time? Why hasn't Russia's cyber capabilities made it a significant impact to turn the tide of this war, or even to slow the pace of Ukraine's successes? And what are they trying to do right now to stabilize the situation, and what could they be doing in the future? We've already talked a little bit before about Russia's notorious hacking unit, Sandworm, which fits in within their military intelligence, or the GRU. And I'm not going to go into the force structure of this again. If you want to learn more about Sandworm, I definitely recommend that you hit up that video. It not only covers some of the history of Sandworm, but also where they fit in within Russia's intelligence and military structure. And that can be great information for you to kind of understand what it is that they are specifically doing in this war in Ukraine, because it's not going to be the same as what the FSB will be doing. However, I do want to note that recently they have been changing their tactics from what we talked about in that video, and that's what we're going to be talking about here. I recently attended a virtual session of Cyber WarCon, which is a really neat conference. It's held every year. It's just one day, and it covers all kinds of threat intelligence topics, particularly as they relate to international affairs. And for the record, this video is not at all sponsored by them, but I just wanted to plug Cyber WarCon and say that you should definitely go, because I got my ticket for like 50 bucks, pretty cheap, and of course I was able to attend virtually, and I learned a lot. I thought it was a great time, and I definitely think that if you're interested in that kind of thing, you should definitely check it out as well. But one of the first talks that was given at Cyber WarCon was a talk by two Mandian analysts, Gabby Rincon and John Wolfram. Their topic was later published in Wired and has since been published in a couple of other publications, and there's a link to that article down in this video description. They talk about how Sandworm has, as they said, begun to live on the edge. Now that is an awesome tagline, and I definitely will reference that as we talk about this topic, because it does a really good job on kind of encapsulating what Sandworm has been doing recently. Basically, they found that Sandworm has been hacking edge devices. Now that's basically firewalls, email servers, routers, routers, things like that, things that are on the edge of your network. The idea, of course, is that they can easily access these devices by exploiting well-known and unpatched vulnerabilities. However, the unfortunate downside for Sandworm is that they can be detected a bit more easily in these attacks and then be ejected from the system. But they are attacking these devices really with the same objective set as before, and that is for destruction and disruption operations and intelligence collections operations. Now, previously what they had been doing before this is they would primarily phish user accounts and then gain access to legitimate user accounts and do their work from there. And the reason that's a bit better is not only they're able to work from a granted permission set from the security team, but they also have the cover of the user identity. It doesn't look like it's an attacker performing actions, it looks like it's a legitimate user. That's opposed from, say, hacking an edge device. Well, that's all going to be detected. That's what a security team is monitoring for specifically. So why is this all a giant gamble for Russia, and what are they doing with this access? As Gabby and John pointed out in their presentation, the decision to attack edge devices and the decisions that happen after they breach these devices really comes as the result of an elevated op tempo. That is to say that they're having to do increasingly more work with less or the same amount of resources as they had before. And I want to say that that not only is unsustainable, but it also matches what's going on in the physical world, where the Russian military is having to increase their op tempo in an attempt to stabilize a front line that's simply untenable. And this elevated op tempo leads to mistakes over time. That's just a factor of human existence with trying to increase the amount of work with the same amount of time, or even increasingly less sleep or other kinds of rest and recovery operations. Simply put, elevated op tempo can lead to human burnout. That can also lead to negative impacts on the operation. Mistakes like, as Gabby and John point out in their presentation, failing to properly configure an edge device, which leads to the Ukrainians kicking them out, or passing the wrong commands for the specific wiper that's being employed, no action being done, and all the forensics being collected for later. And those are two examples that they presented in their talk. Russia is clearly hoping that if they can increase the frequency of their attacks, then perhaps they can disrupt Ukraine's ability not only to govern and administer their current holdings, but also disrupt Ukraine's ability to receive foreign aid and continue military operations along its extensive front. None of that obviously is a guarantee, and over time it will lead to a degenerated state with Sandworm where they will not be able to maintain this op tempo or even a normal op tempo until they've had some time to recover. This is a position that Russia can ill afford to sustain unless they get any kind of breakthrough that allows them time to recover. Add on top of this the giant brain drain of Russian citizens leaving Russian borders to avoid conscription, and you have a bit of a problematic situation where Sandworm is no longer able to recruit as frequently as they could before, and so that burnout problem becomes even more heavy on its current members. At CyberWarCon, it was later noted by both the Mandiant team and Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center, or MISTIC, that Sandworm is not only attacking Ukrainian infrastructure, but they've also gone to attack Polish infrastructure sometime between March and October. And they've primarily targeted logistics infrastructure between those two countries. This might be because that while Russia still remains Ukraine's #1 military hardware supplier, they still are trying to disrupt the NATO supplies that are being sent to Ukraine. And those supplies have proven incredibly valuable for the Ukrainian military. Supplies like Javelin anti-tank missile systems or HIMARS that have had huge tactical or even now strategic impacts on the battlefield. You know, Russia doesn't want those to continue to flow to the Ukrainian military. And really, since they haven't been able to breach Ukrainian airspace, their only options are in cyberspace. And while those attacks have happened, we can't really say that they have been particularly effective because Ukraine has still been able to receive that assistance. As Wired reports in their article, Ukraine's State Services for Special Communications and Information Protection, that is a mouthful, so I had to read it directly from the script, or the SSSCIP. Ukraine, we gotta get that down to like 3 words, okay? They agreed to the findings that were presented in this talk. Interesting though, they note that while Sandworm is primarily targeting edge devices, the FSB is still focusing on phishing attacks. So it's not like phishing attacks are going away, and it's not like the civilian intelligence apparatus has had an elevated op tempo, although we can all assume that they probably have as well. The diversity of attacks, the increase in op tempo, and the desperation by the Russian government and military to stabilize the situation certainly makes this an interesting domain to pay attention to. You can certainly see with these attacks and the increased op tempo that Russia is trying to alleviate the military situation in the cyber domain. However, we haven't seen that to be particularly effective since, well, they keep losing territory. Like I pointed out in the beginning of this video, Russia is losing on almost all fronts, and the pressure is mounting on Vladimir Putin to stabilize the situation because they do not want want to, under any circumstance, sit down with the Ukrainians and take Ukrainian terms for a ceasefire. That would be not only politically humiliating, that would potentially be a huge threat to the legitimacy of Putin's administration. Therefore, we're probably more likely to continue to see attacks by Sandworm like this, and then potentially other parts of the Russian military where they're desperately trying to, as they say, live on the edge, attack edge devices, and continue the attacks with wiper malware to try to disrupt Ukraine's ability to launch these counteroffensives. They are operating fast, they're operating furious, but they are also operating incredibly sloppily. And while this may lead to actualized disruptions in Ukraine's logistics capabilities, and it may even lead to leaks and intelligence that Russia could use to stabilize some parts of the front line, it's very clear that momentum is firmly in Ukraine's hands. It does need to be noted that Ukraine has put up a heck of a fight in cyberspace just as they have in the physical world. They've kept Russia and Sandworm from dictating the terms of this fight. That's definitely notable because many people at the outset of this war thought that Russia would be dictating these terms. Certainly, whenever the war started, at least I thought that Russia was going to use all of its capabilities in this war to try to end the war as quick as possible. And while we certainly saw a goal to do that, we didn't see that coordination necessarily manifest in a way that we would expect of a modernized army. In cyberspace, that desire manifested in the deployment of wiper malware, and that certainly was an indicator of what was to come. That said, months later, we've seen Russia still struggle to coordinate the different domains of warfare to really achieve any kind of a specific goal, and those domains of warfare being land, air, sea, and cyberspace. That's led in the physical space to things like air sorties, attacking civilian targets that have no tactical necessity whatsoever, to a land army that's operating without any kinds of indirect fire support in some cases, or without any kind of air support in other cases, or a navy that is kind of left on the sidelines right now. The consequences of this ineptitude by modern military standards is a failed invasion, and that not only is the result of tactical failures, but strategic failures as well as the failures in cyberspace. At this point, I think it's fair to say that cyberspace is not going to dictate the way that this war ends, though it may delay the way that this war ends. It's clear that Ukraine has all the momentum and Russia is doing its very best to hold on to what it has, though it's not doing a very good job of that. And all of that has left Sandworm living on the edge, as Gabby and John put it. Thank you to everybody who has supported the channel. You can see them here. If you're interested in supporting this channel, it definitely helps keep these videos coming out. Consider liking this video, of course, as a way to help YouTube know that this is a beneficial video for people. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see other videos like this, and then also consider becoming a channel member. With all that, I'll see you all next time. See ya.